1 Peter may well be the most relevant book in the New Testament. I say that for two reasons that we see both here in the opening verses of 1 Peter chapter 1. In the very first verse, we're told that Peter, the apostle, is the one who is writing this letter under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Well, Peter is the one apostle that most Christians can readily identify with. They understand Peter, maybe more than any of the other apostles. They understand his fallibility. Peter's fallibility is all over the pages of the New Testament. He was the one who denied knowing Christ 3 times. He was the one who is impetuous. He speaks before he thinks. He acts before he thinks. And I think most Christians can readily identify with that fallibility and that impetuosity. But not only was this letter written by the Apostle Peter, the one Christian that we can most readily identify with, but it was also written at a time in his life that he was at his most mature, his most reflective. 1 Peter was written near the end of Peter's lifetime. He had already been through all of the cycles and the seasons of life. And so here he is reflecting upon life, reflecting upon the Christian life. I think for those reasons, 1 Peter is one of the most relevant books we can read. But we also read in terms of his intended audience that Peter is writing to the exiles of the dispersion, elect exiles of the dispersion. Now, we don't know exactly who these exiles are, exiles of the dispersion. It could be that Peter has in mind Jews that were forced to leave their homes, leave Israel before the death of Christ, and later in the dispersion, if you will, became Christians. Or it could be that Peter has in mind those Christians who were driven from their homes after the death of Stephen because of the ministry of Saul and the persecutions that arose through the ministry of Saul. Or it could be that Peter is speaking figuratively here, and he's speaking about those Christians who are living in Asia Minor, and because of their Christianity, living in their native lands, they are being persecuted and oppressed just by the fact that they're Christians. And so whoever it is that Peter is talking to, I think in one sense it's immaterial. They are exiles, and they're living as exiles. They're experiencing an exilic lifestyle, which means no doubt they're experiencing loneliness and isolation and separation. They're experiencing perhaps opposition and discouragement and persecution. And so these are the folks that Peter is writing to. And that, I think, is something that makes 1 Peter especially relevant for you and me today. Not only because we're living in an age of a pandemic, which has given us this sense of isolation and separation and maybe even discouragement, but more than that, because as Christians, we are exiles. We are pilgrims passing through. This is not our homeland. Heaven, if you will, is our home country, and you and I are exiles. And so this book, written to exiles by the apostle that we can most readily identify with at the most reflective and seasoned point in his life, I think for all of these reasons we see a letter that is very relevant and very practical for you and me today. And it's in this context, it's to this kind of a people that Peter is writing, and he's writing to give hope and to give comfort. In 1 Peter 1, the hope and the comfort that Peter is trying to give comes in the form of trying to show how great our salvation really is. That's the theme of 1 Peter 1, to show us how great our salvation is, and to give hope in the midst of isolation, in the midst of discouragement, in the midst of opposition and persecution, all of which are part of living as an exile. This is what 1 Peter chapter 1 is really all about.